becomes clear he has no case to stand on. The letters stop, and Preston's threats fade into the background. Though a lingering frustration with his arrogance remains, Alexis feels it's best to move on and focus on improving the restaurant experience rather than getting mired in a vindictive legal battle. Internally, Alexis reflects on the lessons learned from her time as a hidden waitress. She admits to herself that she was naive to think her presence alone would naturally encourage better behavior. In reality, it took a shocking incident and her bold reveal to spark real change. But she takes heart in knowing that once people saw justice in action, many embraced the shift. During a staff meeting, she addresses this point, hoping to inspire everyone. "I came here to see how we can improve. But what I realized is that change requires more than just observation. It requires standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. We won't always have perfect solutions, but if we approach each challenge with respect for our fellow human beings, we can make this restaurant and the world a better place." Later that evening, as business winds down, Alexis helps close out the registers and wipe down tables. Old habits die hard. A couple of regulars pass by, greeting her warmly and congratulating her on the positive buzz around town. She thanks them, her heart buoyed by the knowledge that this place has finally become what it was always meant to be: a welcoming haven of good food, mutual respect, and genuine hospitality. Before switching off the lights, Alexis stands at the threshold of the dining area, letting her gaze wander across the room. She recalls her first days here, the slight nervousness at being an undercover boss, the frustration of witnessing disrespect, and the quiet satisfaction of serving people who truly appreciate good service. All of it led to this moment, a turning point not just for La Petite Lumière but for the entire network of restaurants in her family's portfolio. Now, dear viewers, we turn the question to you. If you found out a person you mistreated was secretly in a position of power, how would you feel? Would you regret your actions? Or would you have treated them respectfully in the first place? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in fairness, treating every worker with dignity, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. After the lights go off and the doors lock, Alexis steps outside into the crisp night air. She inhales deeply, taking in the faint aromas of nearby cafes closing up shop. A gentle breeze rustles a row of potted plants near the entrance. In the glow of the street lamp, she spots her reflection in the glass door, wearing the same humble server's uniform. It reminds her how this all began. A simple waitress uniform that concealed a world of power and responsibility. She knows her journey is far from over. There are many more restaurants, many more staff members, and many more Prestons out there who need to learn the lesson of respect. Yet, for tonight at least, she can rest knowing she sparked a meaningful change right where she stood. The moral of this tale is clear. Never judge someone's worth by their job title, their appearance, or your assumptions. The unseen depths of a person might surprise you, and in those depths, you may find a kindness, a determination, or an influence capable of rewriting the rules of the game. Always remember, we're all humans first, employees or customers second. A little compassion goes a long way, and respect shouldn't be reserved for those who are important. True leadership, true success, and true contentment come when we choose to uplift each other, no matter our social or financial standing. Thank you for joining us in this story of courage, transformation, and a powerful hidden identity. If this message resonated with you, like, subscribe, and share our content with others who believe in the power of fairness and empathy. Together, we can stand against discrimination and create spaces where everyone feels valued. And with that, we end on a final note. Judge people by their character, not by stereotypes or assumptions. Because you never know, the person serving you dinner tonight might just be the one with the power to change your world tomorrow. Students gossiping about the latest online trends, stepping around older students who seemed too lost in their own chatter to notice him. With each step, Daniel felt his heart pound, half from anticipation and half from an odd concern that the man might have disappeared. Standing at the main entrance, Daniel peered through the wrought iron gate. He recognized the shape of the man he hadn't left. He was now seated on a low concrete ledge just outside the school boundary, his eyes still glued to that weathered piece of paper. He looked even more disheveled under the harsh midday light, his coat crumpled and stained with what looked like oil or mud. Daniel took a breath, mustering courage. He pushed the gate open enough to slip outside. "Hey, sir," he called politely. "Are you lost? Do you need help finding something?" The man looked up, surprise evident on his face. Daniel's gentle tone and kind eyes probably stood in stark contrast to whatever responses he'd been getting from passers-by. The man clutched the piece of paper tightly, as if it was the only thing tethering him to his purpose. I'm trying to find this place," he said, his voice hoarse. He held out the crumpled note. Written on it was an address, along with the words Greenwood High School. However, the numbers and letters had faded, making it difficult to read. Daniel recognized the school's address, but it seemed incomplete. There was more scribbled beneath it, possibly a name or a phone number. "I go here," Daniel said kindly. "Maybe I can help you figure it out. Is there someone you need to meet?" The man looked down at his hands, his expression a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "I'm supposed to meet a counselor, maybe? Someone who can guide me or... I don't know. I was told I could find help at this school. But so far, I've been turned away by security. They think I'm just loitering or causing trouble. I'm not here to harm anyone." The sincerity in his eyes struck Daniel. Before he could respond, a loud, mocking voice cut through the air. "Look at this, Reyes. Taking pity on the homeless now, are you?" It was Eric, flanked by two of his friends. The trio strode up to Daniel and the stranger, their expressions ranging from amused to outright disdainful. "Always the hero, aren't you?" Eric teased, gesturing at the man with a sneer. "Why don't you take this guy to your place if you're so concerned, Daniel? Oh wait, you probably don't even have room in your tiny house." Daniel felt his blood boil. It was one thing to pick on him, but insulting the stranger who was clearly in need was too much. The man looked away, as though ashamed to be the subject of ridicule. Daniel clenched his fist, reminding himself that violence wasn't the answer. Still, a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. "Eric, just leave him alone." "He's not bothering anyone," Daniel said, voice quivering slightly but steady enough to convey his resolve. "Not bothering anyone?" Eric scoffed, rolling his eyes theatrically. "He's trespassing for starters, and he looks like he's going to beg for change any second. We don't need that kind of riffraff around here. This is a prestigious school, or have you forgotten?" Anger surged in Daniel's chest, but he swallowed it down. "We're all human," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "That's all that matters." Eric's friends snickered, but before Eric could lob another insult, a teacher on lunch duty, Miss Harlow, approached them. She glanced curiously at the man outside the gate, then at the boys. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, arms crossed. "No problem, Miss Harlow," Eric said smoothly, slipping into a pretense of politeness. "Just trying to explain to Daniel that he can't just let strangers wander onto campus." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the older man stood up, drawing Miss Harlow's attention. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said softly. "I just need to find someone, but I don't have a phone or a ride. I'm sorry if I've bothered your students." His voice carried a note of sadness that tugged at Daniel's heart. Ms. Harlow, clearly uncertain about how to handle the situation, gave a curt nod. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the school premises for now. If you need assistance, there is a shelter downtown." The authority in her voice indicated that she was merely doing her job. But Daniel couldn't let it end there. This man was lost, and something told him that turning him away wasn't right. Daniel quickly dug into his pocket and pulled out the few dollars he had left from his summer chores. He pressed the money into the man's hand. "Here," Daniel said quietly. "It's not much, but maybe it can help you get a bus ticket or something." The man's face softened with gratitude. He looked as though he might cry but held it back. "Thank you, son. That's very kind of you." Eric's scoffing laughter broke the moment. "Seriously, Reyes? Don't waste your lunch money on him. You'll be the one begging for lunch tomorrow." Daniel ignored Eric, focusing on the stranger's trembling hands. "Please, sir," Daniel urged. "Use this for whatever you need. I'll try to meet you after school if you're still around. Maybe I can help you talk to the administration." The older man nodded, wiping the corner of his eye. He carefully pocketed the money. Miss Harlow gestured for him to move along, and he trudged away from the gate, still clutching the crumpled paper. As Daniel watched him go, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. He'd done what little he could, but it felt woefully inadequate. Touching, Eric said sarcastically, rolling his eyes one last time before leading his friends back inside. Ms. Harlow reminded Daniel to return to campus. With a final glance at the departing figure, Daniel re-entered the school grounds, wondering if he'd ever see that stranger again, and if he'd done the right thing. Have you ever felt torn between following the rules and following your conscience? Maybe you've faced a similar choice, where doing something compassionate meant breaking a small rule or ignoring social expectations. Would you have acted as Daniel did, or would the risks have been too much? Let us know if you've experienced something like this. Comment below and share your thoughts. Classes resumed with their usual rhythm, but for Daniel, focusing on algebra problems or Shakespearean sonnets was almost impossible. The stranger's weary face haunted him. He kept replaying that moment in his head, the man's eyes brimming with desperation, clutching a piece of paper like it was his last hope. Something about it felt bigger than just a random person down on his luck. The address, the school name, it all pointed to something more, something Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. Every time the bell rang for a class change, Daniel found himself glancing outside the windows, secretly hoping he'd spot the man lingering around. But there was no trace of him. The day dragged on, each class feeling like a hurdle to clear before Daniel could finally investigate further. Meanwhile, Eric made sure to broadcast what he considered Daniel's ridiculous act of charity. He spread the story of how Daniel wasted his lunch money on a stranger. He'll probably have to skip meals now. Eric laughed in the locker room during gym class, loud enough for everyone to hear. But hey, that's what happens when your brain is as poor as your wallet. A ripple of laughter passed through a few classmates, though not all joined in. Some looked uncomfortable. After all, Daniel was known for being polite and earnest. But Eric's influence was strong, and no one openly challenged him. Have you ever encountered someone whose confidence and social standing let them get away with the worst behavior? It's a tough situation. Standing up to them risks bringing their wrath down on you. Most students found it easier to just keep their heads down. Daniel, too, endured the humiliation silently, though inside he burned with a mixture of anger and worry. By the final bell, Daniel practically sprinted to the gate, ignoring the playful jabs and suspicious glances. He scanned the perimeter, but the stranger was nowhere in sight. Disappointment clawed at him. He'd promised to help. His shoulders slumped as he realized there might not be a second chance. Just as he was about to turn away, a shy whisper reached his ears. "Psst, hey." Daniel glanced around, confused, until he spotted a young girl, maybe about 10 or 11, peeking out from behind a hedgerow. She wore tattered clothes, much like the older man, and her hair was tied back in messy pigtails. She looked hesitant to approach, but the moment Daniel noticed her, she took a step forward. Did you give my uncle some money earlier?" the girl asked, her voice soft. "He told me a boy from this school helped him and I think that was you." Daniel's eyes widened. "Yes, it was. Is he okay?" "I wanted to help him more, but everything happened so fast." The girl nodded, then shook her head. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions: relief, fear, gratitude. "He's resting at a small park near here. He's been looking for someone important, but we can't find them. He said he wanted me to come see if that kind boy was still here." Without a second thought, Daniel said, "Take me to him." He threw a glance at the clock on his phone. He had to be home soon to help his mom with dinner preparations, but this felt urgent. Something in the girl's eyes, an earnest plea, made it impossible for him to say no. The walk to the park was short but filled with tension. Daniel's mind swirled with questions. Who exactly were these people? Why were they looking for someone at Greenwood High? The park itself was a simple neighborhood spot. A few benches, a swing set, and a slide. Hardly anyone was around at this hour, except for a jogger or two passing by. Under a sprawling oak tree, Daniel spotted the man sitting on a bench, his coat draped over his lap. He looked exhausted, as though every ounce of energy had been drained from him. The man's eyes lit up with recognition when he saw Daniel. "You came," he said, his voice trembling with relief. Thank you. Daniel sat down beside him. How can I help? Do you need more money? Do you need food? The man shook his head. We managed to buy a small meal. Thank you for that. But there's something else. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old letter. I'm looking for a teacher who used to work at Greenwood High. Someone named Mr. Edmund. He was the last known contact for her. His voice trailed off, and Daniel watched his eyes cloud with a hint of sadness. What do you need from Mr. Edmund? Daniel asked gently. The man hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. He might have the information we need about an inheritance, or at least some funds that could keep us off the streets. Daniel's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Inheritance? This was certainly more complex than he'd imagined. And you think Mr. Edmund might still be at Greenwood? The man shook his head. We tried talking to people at the front office, but they said no teacher by that name works there anymore. They couldn't, or wouldn't, give us more information. Daniel sighed, recalling how the administration could be strict about privacy. But Mr. Edmund's name sounded vaguely familiar. I think there was a Mr. Edmund in the math department some years back. My older brother mentioned him once. Maybe we can find someone who knows where he went? The man's face lit with hope. He introduced himself as Gregory, gesturing to the young girl. This is my niece, Lydia. We've been traveling for weeks. We lost our home, and the only lead we have left is Mr. Edmund. Daniel felt a surge of determination. I'll ask around. If we find Mr. Edmund, maybe he can point you in the right direction. Gregory nodded, relief evident in the slump of his shoulders. Thank you. You've already done so much. Just promise you'll be careful. Not everyone is as kind as you. The memory of Eric's scornful face flashed through Daniel's mind. I know, he admitted, but we have to try. That night, Daniel could hardly sleep. He spent hours online, trying to find any reference to a Mr. Edmund, Greenwood High, and maybe an old lawsuit or inheritance claim. But his searches yielded very little. The frustration gnawed at him, yet the sense of responsibility didn't waver. He couldn't bear the thought of Gregory and Lydia wandering around without any real resources or direction. In the days that followed, Daniel discreetly questioned some of the older staff at the school. Most brushed him off. A few recalled a Mr. Edmund who had retired but couldn't say where he'd gone. The details were fuzzy, limited by time and staff turnover. Meanwhile, Eric's daily mockery reached new heights. He snickered in the hallways, whispering to his cronies about Daniel's obsession with vagabonds. Tension rose further when Daniel discovered that Eric's father was set to donate a significant sum to the school for a new sports facility. This meant teachers and the principal turned a blind eye to Eric's bullying, as they didn't want to jeopardize the sponsorship. The injustice of it all simmered within Daniel, but he kept a calm front. He had a bigger mission now. Days turned into a week, and each afternoon Daniel would visit Gregory and Lydia at the small park or occasionally bring them sandwiches and fruit. Despite Eric's relentless teasing, Daniel found joy in helping them. He felt a sense of purpose, a moral conviction that overshadowed his own hardships. A subtle transformation was taking place in him, one that wouldn't be fully realized until everything came to a head. Have you ever felt that pull toward a cause greater than yourself? That unwavering certainty that something needs to be done, no matter how big or small you are. If you have, you'll understand Daniel's determination. And if you believe in standing up for justice, even when it's tough, subscribe now to show your support. Because this is just the beginning of Daniel's journey, and the conflict is about to escalate in a way no one saw coming. Tensions reached a boiling point on a Friday afternoon. The atmosphere at Greenwood High was electric. Students buzzed about an upcoming pep rally for the basketball team, and Eric Henderson was at the center of it, boasting about new uniforms his father's money had paid for. Meanwhile, Daniel had spent the morning in the school library, combing through yearbooks to find any reference to Mr. Edmund. Finally, in a yearbook from nearly 10 years ago, Daniel found a small, grainy photo of a man named Charles Edmund, labeled as Math Department Staff. Below the photo was a brief note, retiring this year after 2 decades of dedicated service. There was no mention of where he might have gone next. But something in Daniel told him this was the man Gregory was searching for. Desperate for leads, Daniel approached the librarian. Ms. Miller, Do you remember Mr. Edmund? Where he went after he retired? Ms. Miller, an older woman with kind eyes, glanced at the photo and frowned. I believe he moved to Clearview City, about 2 hours away. He mentioned having family there. But I'm not certain. It wasn't much, but it was something. Daniel thanked her and dashed out, eager to share the news with Gregory. He just stepped into the courtyard when he found himself cornered by Eric and 2 of his cronies. They looked unusually grim. Where do you think you're running off to? Eric demanded, grabbing Daniel by the shoulder. Daniel tried to brush him off. Let me go. I don't have time for this. Eric tightened his grip, and Daniel winced at the pressure. You're not going anywhere until I get some answers, Eric said. Word is you've been snooping around about old teachers, talking to staff, and sneaking out of class to meet some bum. Do you have any idea how bad this makes our school look? Daniel glared at him. What business is it of yours? I'm trying to help someone in need, but I guess you wouldn't understand that. A muscle twitched in Eric's jaw. He looked around, noticing the crowd forming. A few teachers were busy dealing with last-minute pep rally details, so they weren't paying attention. Sensing a chance to humiliate Daniel publicly, Eric raised his voice. You think you're some kind of hero, Reyes? A saint feeding all the beggars? Newsflash, nobody cares. And if my dad finds out this is causing trouble, he'll have the principal shut it down. Money talks, remember? Daniel's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. People matter more than money, he shot back. Maybe if you stopped judging everyone for 5 seconds, you'd realize that. The crowd that had gathered began to whisper, some siding with Daniel, others too intimidated to voice support. Eric's face turned red. Without warning, he shoved Daniel hard, causing him to stumble backward. The onlookers gasped. Daniel steadied himself, eyes blazing. But before he could recover, Eric's next shove sent him sprawling onto the courtyard pavement. Pain radiated through his arm where he landed, and his backpack slid across the ground. A hush fell over the courtyard as Eric stood over him, triumphant. Stay out of my business, Eric hissed. Or I'll make your life even worse. It all happened so fast that no teacher intervened until it was almost over. Finally, Ms. Harlow appeared, rushing forward to break things up. Eric, Daniel, stop this, she cried, positioning herself between them. Daniel pushed himself up, bruises stinging. Anger flared in his eyes, but he swallowed it. His mind flashed to Gregory and Lydia, waiting for news. I have nothing else to say, he muttered, retrieving his backpack from the ground. Without a backward glance at Eric or the gaping crowd, he sprinted toward the exit. He found Gregory and Lydia at their usual spot in the park, his arms still throbbing. Gasping for breath, he showed them the yearbook photo. Clearview City, he said, as Lydia helped him sit down. Mr. Edmund might be there. I can help you get there if you want. Gregory's eyes widened, but he also noticed Daniel's scrapes. You're hurt. Did someone do this to you? Daniel shook his head dismissively, trying to downplay it. It's nothing. I'm fine. But Gregory wasn't convinced. His brow furrowed in worry as he handed Daniel a handkerchief to dab at a small cut on his elbow. This school, are you sure it's the right place for you? You're the kindest person I've met in a long time, and they treat you like this? Daniel shrugged. Not everyone is like that. Just some people. And I'm not giving up on your search. Moved by Daniel's resolve, Gregory placed a hand on the teenager's shoulder. You have a good heart. Thank you. If this Mr. Edmund is in Clearview City, we need to figure out how to get there. Daniel pulled out his phone. There's a bus that goes there on weekends. I can pay for your tickets if I dip into my savings. It's not a lot, but... Gregory held up a hand, tears filling his eyes. No more of that. You've done enough. I'm sure I can find odd jobs or something to earn the bus fare. Just as Daniel was about to protest, a familiar, mocking voice echoed through the park. Oh, look who we have here. The saint and his beloved hobos. Daniel's stomach dropped. Eric had followed him. Along with him were 2 friends, carrying smartphones held out like cameras. They seemed intent on filming. What do you want? Daniel snapped, standing to shield Gregory and Lydia. Eric ignored him, pointing his phone at Gregory. So this is the big secret, huh? You're helping these bums on school time? He panned the camera to Lydia. And there's a kid too? This is too good. Imagine what my dad will say when he sees how you're tarnishing Greenwood's reputation. Gregory and Lydia looked mortified, shrinking under Eric's sneering gaze. Daniel's anger boiled over. Stop it. Turn that off. But Eric only laughed. Make me. One of his friends nudged Gregory. So, old man, how much are you milking out of this gullible kid? It was in that moment that everything changed. Gregory stood up, seemingly tired of hiding. He gave Eric and his friends a look so commanding, so filled with unexpected authority, that they actually froze. Taking a step forward, Gregory's voice rang out clear, loud, and steady. I never asked for your money, nor do I intend to. But if I wanted to, I could buy and sell everything you own, boy. Daniel's eyes widened. Eric's phone wavered in midair. The two other bullies exchanged skeptical glances, but something about Gregory's tone conveyed he wasn't bluffing. Gregory reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Only this time, it wasn't the same crumpled note. It was a crisp set of legal documents, sealed with official markings. My name is Gregory Thompson. I own multiple patents in the biotech industry, and I come from a family lineage with assets worth billions. A hush fell over the park. Daniel blinked in disbelief. Lydia looked at her uncle with teary pride. Eric and his friends seemed stunned, their phones still held out uncertainly. I fell on hard times after a series of legal battles over my grandfather's estate, Gregory continued, his voice unyielding. We lost our home when those funds were frozen and certain unscrupulous parties tried to claim them. But make no mistake, I am far from destitute in the grand scheme of things. His gaze flicked over Eric's stunned expression. I may not have physical cash right now, but I have resources and connections that reach far beyond this little town. Daniel felt his heartbeat thunder in his ears. So the man he'd been helping wasn't just an ordinary stranger, he was someone with staggering potential wealth, trapped in a complicated legal struggle. Gregory's humility and ragged clothes had hidden this reality, but now the secret was out in the open. What are you talking about? Eric stammered, his bravado crumbling. If you're so rich, why are you out here like this? Gregory shot him a withering look. Because money doesn't solve everything. The courts froze our assets until a final ruling is made. We're searching for Mr. Edmund because he holds a key piece of evidence in our favor. Once we prove our claim, we'll regain access to every cent and more. And when that day comes, I will remember exactly who treated us with kindness and who treated us like dirt. Eric's face turned pale. His phone trembled in his hand, and a realization dawned on his features. He'd not only bullied and filmed a homeless man, he'd insulted someone who might soon wield extraordinary power. The onlookers, including Eric's buddies, slowly backed away, no longer eager to be part of this confrontation. Daniel stood there, stunned but also relieved. All the pieces clicked into place. The search for Mr. Edmund, the intangible sense that Gregory was no ordinary person, and now this revelation. He glanced at Lydia, who was smiling up at him through her tears. And then, without warning, Eric lashed out with a final, desperate move. He lunged forward, trying to knock the documents out of Gregory's hand. But Gregory sidestepped him with surprising agility, and Eric stumbled to the ground. The phone he was holding clattered across the pavement. In an instant, everything changed. Word spread like wildfire among the small group of witnesses. The public humiliation that Eric intended for Daniel now turned on him. This was the big reveal, and it shook the foundations of how everyone viewed the stranger and Daniel. The aftermath of that confrontation was swift and dramatic. By the following Monday morning, the entire school was abuzz with rumors of the homeless billionaire. Students whispered in hallways, speculating about how someone so wealthy could end up wandering the streets with nothing but a worn coat and an equally worn niece. Some doubted the story, insisting it was a hoax. Others, who had seen the incident firsthand, insisted it was the truth. Eric found himself at the center of a storm, this time, not one he could control. Videos taken by his own friends had circulated, showing him mockingly filming Gregory, only to be confronted with the bombshell reveal. The footage went viral among the student body, and it wasn't long before teachers and even the principal became aware of the situation. Principal Morton called Eric and Daniel into his office, along with Gregory, who had been invited to explain the details of his search for Mr. Edmund. The small office felt cramped with tension. Eric sat stiffly, arms crossed, his face drained of color. Daniel fidgeted nervously, and Gregory stood calmly, his presence dignified despite his threadbare coat. Clearing his throat, Principal Morton addressed them. "I've seen the videos and I've heard both sides. Mr. Thompson, Gregory, has explained his circumstances. We have verified some of his claims through preliminary checks." He gave Eric a pointed look. "Eric, your behavior in that video is unacceptable. This school does not condone bullying or harassment. Your father's donations to the school do not grant you immunity from consequences." Eric's eyes flickered with panic. This was the first time the principal had directly spoken of punishment, despite the Henderson family's influence. But Principal Morton, The principal raised a hand to silence him. "Please spare me the excuses. You physically assaulted a fellow student, and you demeaned a man who was seeking legitimate help regarding former staff. Considering the evidence, you are suspended for 2 weeks. Further discipline may follow if we find any more misconduct." Eric's jaw dropped. He glanced at Gregory, perhaps to plead for mercy. But Gregory's face was resolute. Daniel merely watched, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and empathy. He didn't revel in Eric's downfall. Part of him felt sorry for Eric, who had allowed his arrogance and biases to spiral into something so ugly. When the meeting ended, Eric stormed out of the office, shoulders hunched. For the first time, Daniel noticed tears glistening in Eric's eyes. Perhaps it was the realization that no amount of money or influence could reverse the damage he'd done. Outside the principal's office, Gregory placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Thank you for standing by me," he said softly. "I'm sorry if all this caused you trouble." Daniel shook his head. "It's not your fault. If anything, I'm glad the truth came out. But what happens now?" Gregory exhaled, relief and lingering anxiety in his eyes. "Now, Lydia and I head to Clearview City. I've already made some calls, and it looks like Mr. Edmund is indeed living there. Once we track him down, we can finalize our evidence in court. If all goes well, our assets will be released, and then," he paused, as if reluctant to continue. "Then we rebuild our lives." Daniel nodded, smiling. He noticed how the hallways had gone quiet, students peeking from classrooms to catch a glimpse of Gregory. Word spread fast. Everywhere Gregory went, curious glances followed. But the man held his head high, and no one dared to question him like before. Meanwhile, Eric's father, Mr. Henderson, arrived at the school later that day, demanding an explanation for his son's suspension. Principal Morton calmly showed him the footage. There was no argument left to make. Furious and embarrassed, Mr. Henderson threatened to pull funding from the new sports facility, but the principal didn't waver. "We appreciate donations, but not at the expense of our values," he said firmly. For once, Mr. Henderson had to swallow his pride. Throughout that week, Daniel noticed a shift in the students' attitudes. Some approached him with kindness, asking how he was holding up after Eric's assault. Others praised him for standing by Gregory. A few, perhaps fearing retribution now that they believed Gregory could be extremely wealthy, tried to befriend him. Daniel's sense of justice and sincerity never wavered. He treated everyone the same, whether they were genuine or just curious about Gregory's fortune. Gregory, for his part, spent his remaining days in town finalizing details for the trip to Clearview City. He extended his thanks to Daniel's family personally, visiting their modest home. The meeting was emotional. Daniel's mother insisted on cooking a homemade meal for Gregory and Lydia. Sitting at their small kitchen table, Gregory marveled at the warmth and generosity they displayed, knowing they themselves didn't have much to spare. When conversation turned to money, Daniel's mother politely shook her head. "You don't owe us anything," she said gently. "What matters is that my son did the right thing by helping you. That's the person I raised him to be." Gregory smiled. "Still, I want to do something to repay you. When my assets are unfrozen, please allow me to invest in Daniel's future." A hush fell over the table. Daniel's cheeks reddened. He wanted to protest. It felt odd to accept such a grand gesture. But a part of him recognized that Gregory wasn't offering charity out of pity, he was offering gratitude. The next day, as Gregory and Lydia prepared to leave, a small group of students gathered at the park to bid them farewell. Daniel was there, of course, along with some faculty members who'd grown curious and sympathetic to Gregory's situation. It was the first time in days that Eric's presence was nowhere to be seen. He was serving his suspension at home, presumably doing damage control with his father. Gregory addressed everyone, his voice solemn yet hopeful. "I will never forget your kindness," he said, looking directly at Daniel. "You believed me before you knew who I was. That's the true definition of compassion." Lydia held Daniel's hand, tears in her eyes, as she echoed her uncle's sentiment. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing us as people, not problems." With that, they boarded a local bus, a stepping stone on their journey to Clearview City. It wasn't a glamorous send-off, but it was filled with genuine emotion and well wishes. Daniel stood there, heart full, waving as the bus pulled away. Do you think the antagonist, Eric, deserves forgiveness? Is there a chance he'll see the error of his ways and change for the better? Let us know your thoughts. Sometimes, even the biggest bullies can learn a lesson, but it often comes at a price. As Gregory and Lydia vanished from view, Daniel had no idea how radically things were about to change for him, for Greenwood High, and even for Eric. The wheels of justice were turning, and soon, a reckoning would arrive that would reshape their entire community. It took nearly a month, but the transformation at Greenwood High was nothing short of astounding. The gossip about Gregory Thompson and his potential fortune never fully died down, yet a new culture seemed to take root, a culture of empathy. Suddenly, more students were stepping forward to help classmates who struggled with financial hardships, academic stress, or personal crises. It was as though Daniel's example had sparked something in people's hearts. Eric returned from his suspension a noticeably changed person. Gone was the arrogant swagger. In its place was a subdued teenager who avoided meeting anyone's gaze. The social hierarchy he once dominated no longer existed. The few who had looked to him as a leader now found his disgrace too embarrassing to be associated with, and those he had bullied steered clear, uncertain of his motives. One afternoon, Daniel spotted Eric alone in the courtyard, staring off into the distance as though haunted by shame. Another piece of news soon captured everyone's attention. Gregory had located Mr. Edmund in Clearview City. The retired teacher still lived in a modest suburban home, quietly tending to his garden. When Gregory and Lydia appeared on his doorstep, he was taken aback but also deeply moved by their story. Mr. Edmund had, in his possession, old documents that supported Gregory's legal claim to his grandfather's estate. With Mr. Edmund's testimony, the courts moved swiftly to unfreeze a significant portion of Gregory's assets. In an unexpected twist, the local paper ran a feature about Gregory, highlighting his ordeal. They interviewed him in his new, temporary apartment, still humble compared to the wealth he would soon regain. He spoke openly about his gratitude for the kindness he'd received in Greenwood, specifically praising the compassion of a certain young student named Daniel. Within weeks, Gregory's life began to turn around dramatically. He arranged for Lydia to enroll in a private school near their new home, ensuring she wouldn't have to face the struggles they had endured on the streets. Despite this shift, he never forgot his promise to help Daniel. One late afternoon, as the day's final bell rang at Greenwood High, a sleek black car pulled up to the gates. Out stepped Gregory, dressed in a smart yet understated suit, looking every inch the successful businessman he was destined to be. Word spread quickly that the Billionaire was on campus again, and a crowd of curious students formed. Daniel, rushing out after his last class, stopped short at the sight of Gregory leaning against the car, arms folded, a gentle smile on his face. "Gregory!" Daniel exclaimed, sprinting over. "You look different." Gregory laughed, the lines of stress that once etched his features long gone. "I feel different," he admitted. "Daniel, I've come to fulfill a promise." He extended an envelope toward Daniel, who stared at it nervously. "What is this?" "It's a scholarship fund in your name," Gregory explained. "Fully paid tuition to any college or university you choose, plus a monthly stipend to support your family's needs until you graduate. Think of it as my way of saying thank you For being human when others weren't? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to refuse, to say that he hadn't helped Gregory for money. But deep down, he knew how much this could change his life and his family's. He looked up at Gregory, voice trembling with gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep being the kind, compassionate soul you've always been," Gregory replied, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "That's all I want." By now, a sizable group of teachers and students had gathered, watching the exchange. Among them was Eric, standing in the back, his posture rigid, face unreadable. Perhaps, in that moment, he realized the depths of the opportunity he had squandered by choosing arrogance over compassion. Principal Morton stepped forward, shaking Gregory's hand. "This is an extraordinary gesture. Thank you for believing in one of our own." Gregory simply nodded. "Your school nurtured a gem," he replied, smiling at Daniel. He just needed a chance to shine. News of the scholarship spread like wildfire. Social media posts hailed Daniel as the boy who helped a billionaire, though he quickly pointed out that Gregory wasn't just a billionaire, he was a kind man, someone who truly valued human connection over superficial status. Still, the story was compelling, and local reporters flocked to Greenwood High for interviews. Encouraged by Gregory, Daniel used his newfound visibility to advocate for kindness and equal treatment. He started a small community program at the school, Project Compass, aimed at pairing students in need with resources and mentors. Surplus supplies, donated books, and volunteer tutoring sessions all became part of this initiative. Students who once barely acknowledged Daniel now joined the cause. Teachers praised him for channeling his unexpected fame into something meaningful. Even Eric, in a moment that surprised everyone, approached Daniel one day after school. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Eric mumbled, unable to fully meet Daniel's gaze. "For everything." Daniel studied Eric's face. He saw regret there, genuine regret, mixed with the weight of public humiliation. After a pause, Daniel extended a hand. "Let's start over," he offered. "No more grudges." A flicker of relief crossed Eric's features. He shook Daniel's hand. That simple gesture marked the beginning of a changed dynamic at Greenwood High. Nobody expected Eric to become an overnight saint, but a small step toward humility had been taken. Sometimes that's all it takes for a true transformation to begin. Weeks later, an even bigger surprise arrived. Gregory returned yet again, this time with Lydia, beaming with excitement. With the legal battles mostly resolved, Gregory had regained significant control of his grandfather's estate. Part of that estate included substantial philanthropic donations that Gregory now wished to resume. Standing before an assembly in Greenwood High's auditorium, where hundreds of students, faculty, and parents were gathered, Gregory announced the formation of the Thompson Education Grant, a program to financially support underprivileged students in the district. Thunderous applause echoed through the hall. Daniel, sitting in the front row, felt a surge of pride and humility. This was a full-circle moment. The man he had helped in secret was now publicly transforming the entire community. Faces lit up all around, not from the allure of money, but from the recognition that kindness had paved the way for this incredible blessing. In that auditorium, Gregory recounted his story, how a single act of compassion from a student he'd never met gave him the strength to persist in his search. One small gesture, some spare dollars and a willingness to talk, broke the cycle of hopelessness, Gregory declared, voice resonating with emotion. "And now, I hope to pay that kindness forward 1,000 times over." After the ceremony, a wave of reporters and local dignitaries surrounded Gregory, Daniel, and Lydia. But even in the midst of all the fanfare, Daniel remembered the darkest days, the humiliation at school, Eric's bullying, and the heartbreak of seeing Gregory and Lydia stranded with no place to go. Those memories fueled his resolve to never let fame or success erode his empathy. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel and Gregory's families shared a meal together. This time, the dinner took place at a nicer restaurant, Gregory insisted, but the warmth remained the same as when they had first met in Daniel's modest home. Over plates of steaming food, they laughed and reminisced about the whirlwind journey. Lydia, in her new school uniform, talked about her excitement for the future, and Daniel shared his hopes of going to college to study social work or perhaps community development. When the night ended, hugs were exchanged all around. In the parking lot, before parting ways, Gregory gave Daniel one last piece of advice. Never let anyone make you feel small for doing the right thing. The world needs more people who live by their conscience rather than their ego. Daniel nodded, words failing him. The gravity of this transformation, from a scorned nobody to a community hero, hadn't fully sunk in yet. But he knew his life, and the lives of many others, had changed forever. The next morning at Greenwood High, the usual hustle and bustle felt lighter, more hopeful. Posters announcing Project Compass sign-ups adorned the walls. Eric offered Daniel a silent nod in the hallway, and while they were far from friends, it was progress. Life carried on, homework, exams, family dinners, but the undercurrent of empathy, sparked by one act of kindness, continued to ripple outward. More clubs formed to help local shelters. Teachers volunteered extra hours to tutor struggling students. The seeds of compassion had been planted, and they were beginning to bloom in ways no one had expected. When you think about it, this entire cascade of events, all the changes and revelations, stemmed from a single moment when Daniel saw a stranger outside the school gates and decided to help. It's a reminder that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the biggest transformations. So what about you? What small kindness can you offer someone today? How might a seemingly insignificant moment shape the future in ways you can't even imagine? Share your own experiences in the comments below. And if you believe that respect and compassion should be at the core of everything we do, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can spread the message that real wealth, the kind that truly matters, lies in how we treat each other. Always remember, treat everyone with respect, no matter how they look or where they come from. Because you never know whose life you might be impacting, or who might turn out to be far more than you ever realized.